Awesome. So welcome everybody to today's Lunch and Learn. My name's Angie. I'm the program coordinator for the Business Center Guelph-Wellington. And today we are joined by Lisa Cove. She's come back to talk with us. And today we're talking about food packaging and mostly about food safety. So Food Safety 101 is today's session. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please add them to the chat. I will be monitoring the questions on Facebook while we are live. If you have anything after we're done the program, you can add the questions still there. It does notify me. If you're watching on YouTube later, you can also add the comments there. We will find the answers for you, or you can send us an email, success@guelphbusiness.com, and I will then email you back with responses and connect you to Lisa. So hi, Lisa, welcome for joining us today. We are looking forward to food safety. Is one of the biggest, honestly, food and that whole industry is one of the bigger growing industries for small businesses. So food safety is a really big part of it. And I'm really excited to hear your presentation. So I will pass it over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you. So let me just share my screen and I'll introduce myself. Thank you everyone who came today to view my presentation. Can I go ahead? I have to actually hit share first. There we go. And so my presentation, food safety. So yeah, my name is Lisa Cove. I'm the owner of Co-Motion Packaging Solutions, a consultant for small businesses who are growing, looking to scale. So I assist in the scaling up of your food packaging, but also help you with all the food safety related things that go with that. Essentially because they do go hand in hand. With packaging, we create packaging to create a safety barrier around our food. So all of these things work together, and that's why I combine them in my consulting business. So who am I? My name is Lisa Cove, founder of Co-Motion Packaging Solutions. I have 15+ years experience in the food industry. So I started my career in the technical purchasing side of food manufacturing. So that means that I purchased machinery, maintenance, repair, operations, stores items, capital expenditures, etc. And then from there, I moved to the raw material and packaging purchasing side of a large confectionery company in the Brantford area called Ferrero Canada. So in that job, I was able to travel around the world to visit raw material suppliers and packaging suppliers. And I learned a lot about packaging development, and different things to keep food safe through packaging, as well as food safety related to raw materials. So we had a $20+ million annual spend on packaging alone. Raw materials was far greater than that. And then for my career from Ferrero, I moved to be a purchasing manager, as well as later a warehouse manager at Canada's largest co-manufacturer of frozen entrees for brands like Nestle, Sobeys, Loblaws, and Walmart, to name a few. And in 2016, I became a professor of food safety and traceability in the agriculture business management program at Fanshawe College. So I just like to introduce myself so that you guys know that I'm qualified to talk to you about the topic that we're talking about today. And I'm excited to work with entrepreneurs, no matter what stage you are in your food business, so that I can give my expertise to the growing food business. That's why I'm here. So today I want to talk to you about the importance of food safety, the laws surrounding food safety. We'll touch on that just briefly. Factors contributing to foodborne illness that you should be aware of, safe work habits to handling procedures that reduce food safety risks, and an introduction to HASSA. And the reason I introduce HASSA very quickly is because oftentimes food businesses, as they grow, they hear the word HASSA, HASSA, HASSA. They wonder, is it for me? Do I have to do HASSA? When do I have to be HASSA certified? So I'd just like to do a little brief introduction so you're aware of what HASSA actually is. And every time you hear something, you hear it more and more, you become more familiar with it. So it won't be such a daunting thing. So the importance of food safety. Food safety is a very important topic for food makers and manufacturers because 1 in 8 Canadians get sick each year from food-related illnesses. Foodborne illnesses account for 11,500 hospitalizations each year, and 240 deaths can be attributed to foodborne illness as well. So we can avoid food related illness and death by following proper procedures, and this is from the start of production all the way to distributing to our customers, we can follow strict food safety guidelines and prevent anybody from getting sick from the food that we create. So that's why we have food safety courses, and that's what I want to introduce you to today. So the common culprits in Canada for food problems, we've heard of, you've probably heard of Listeria, Salmonella outbreaks, E. coli. These are the most common, and norovirus. These are what we see the most of, and how Listeria, you may remember a few years back, Maple Leaf was having trouble, finding the cause of the Listeria that was in their meat production plants. Which is a huge problem for them, but it kind of put Listeria on the map. Salmonella, we just had a recent Salmonella outbreak with the Easter candies through Kinder. E. coli is common in products that we can, E. coli can sometimes be found on lettuce or leafy greens that we get from the US or even in Canada. And there's a million reasons for that, but we'll touch on how we can avoid, spreading that around. So these are just the common culprits to know, and that the fact that we should still be concerned that in Canada, 1 in 8 people will get sick each year from contaminated food when there's so many prevention things that we do in place. So it's really important that we pay attention to that. So just quickly about the laws surrounding food safety, we have the Safe Food for Canadians Act and regulations. This is the outline for the requirements for anybody who's importing food to Canada, exporting food outside of Canada, and trading food interprovincially. So it's important to understand what you're doing and who's regulating you. So if you're trying to import food into Canada, you need to have a license through the Safe Food for Canadians Act and regulations. If you're exporting, or if you're moving beyond the borders of Ontario, or if you're joining us from somewhere outside of Ontario, outside of your province, if you're trying to move across borders, that's when the Safe Food for Canadians regulations comes into play. The CFIA has inspection programs. So if you are part and licensed by CFIA, they have different inspection programs that ensure food products meet certain safety standards. They prevent dangerous foods from entering the marketplace, and they ensure speedy recalls if unsafe food does reach the market. So for instance, if you found that one of your raw materials was contaminated with, say, E. coli, but you had already used it to do a production, you could do a recall, and CFIA would assist you in that, to getting that product back from the marketplace so that it doesn't make anyone ill. CFIA can seize your product, suspend your license, cancel your license, they issue fines, and they can recommend prosecution depending on sort of what you're doing. So food safety is a very serious sort of realm, and it's very important to understand that when we're licensed by CFIA, we must follow the guidelines that they put in place, but oftentimes we more than meet the standards when we just follow good food safety, good manufacturing practices, and HASSA. So if you're interested in Ontario, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care is responsible for giving permission to the health inspectors, so the public health inspectors that are in your town. They are in charge of the public health in Ontario. So if you are running a restaurant or a commercial kitchen, you'll be licensed by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care under the Public Health Ontario, which would be your public health unit in your area. This is under the law of the Health Protection and Promotion Act and Food Premise Regulation 49317. So it's just to know that, so if you're not leaving Ontario and you're not doing farming, which kind of falls under OMAFRA, if you're not doing like eggs or milk or dairy or anything like that, you would fall under the Ministry of Long-Term Care, which is your public health inspector. The second you try to leave the borders, want to ship outside of Ontario or outside of Canada, or import something in from the border, across the borders, you'd be licensed by CFIA. So the minimum standards of the Health Protection and Promotions Act, they look at food temperatures, they look at your food handling, how you sanitize, how you do your dishwashing, and personal hygiene practices. So we'll talk about that when we get to that. Just the minimum standards of this HPPA, HIPAA. It applies where food is being manufactured, processed, if it's even being stored. So say it's a warehouse where you're storing your ingredients, handled, displayed, distributed, transported. So this applies to your transport trucks where you're distributing food, or sold or offered for sale, even or excluding private residency. So enforcement, again, we talked about the 37 local public health units who have the ability to condemn food. They can issue tickets under provincial offenses or lay charges, and they can order establishments to be closed or issue a recall on your food product. So if they find that you're not following food safety, so say you have a public health inspection who comes in, or you are making food without the sign off of the public health unit in your area saying that you're allowed to make the food that you're making in the establishment that you're making it, they can condemn your food, they can issue provincial offenses ticket. So it's important to, if you are planning on working in a commercial kitchen or you're planning on getting into business with food related, that you talk to your public health unit and find out what you need to do to get certified by them. And the process is pretty simple if you're following food safety, if you're already in a licensed kitchen area, so say you're using a commercial kitchen, the process is easy if you've taken a food safety course and you understand what they're looking for. So let's talk about foodborne illness. So understanding food contamination. The causes of food contamination include biological, physical, and chemical contamination. So we'll talk about each of those individually. And then there's cross-contamination. So most of us have heard of cross-contamination where we maybe have a raw product, we use it on, you have raw chicken on a cutting board, you take it off, and then you start cutting lettuce, which is ready to eat. That lettuce would now be contaminated with the raw chicken. So that would be cross-contamination. So the causes of foodborne illness, so biological contamination, this is your bacteria and your microorganisms. So biological contamination comes usually, so raw products already contain some level of microbes, pathogens on their surface. So raw chicken, for example, some bacteria are already active in the foods that we eat, and that's why we cook them to bring them down to acceptable levels. There's physical contamination, so this would be objects in your food like jewelry or metal, or in the picture that you see there, glass. That's why we don't use glass on production sites, because it breaks and it shatters, it can end up in the food product. So anything that could fall into your food, fake eyelashes, fake nails, for example, could be physical contamination. And then there's chemical contamination. So often this is like cleaning product residue. Say we do the dishes, but we don't rinse off the soap properly, or we sanitize, we don't use the right parts per million. Chemical contamination can contaminate our food. But foodborne illness is most often caused by biological contamination, the first one that we talked about. So let's talk about preventing biological contamination. So we know that most foodborne illness outbreaks are caused by poor personal hygiene of the people handling the food. So this means people aren't washing their hands properly. Perhaps they're coughing into the food. They are not wearing hairnets or gloves or proper uniform. So there's a lot of different things we can do with our personnel, so either ourselves or the people working for us, to ensure that they're following proper hygiene, so that when they're handling the food, they're not contaminating it with their hands, with their hair, with their fake eyelashes or their fake nails. They're not coughing into the food. They're not coming to work sick. You have to change your uniform if it gets soiled. There's lots of different things we can do. Make sure that we're not wearing dirty clothes in the production site. So personal hygiene of the people that we're working with or ourselves when we're making food. And number one is hand washing, of course, washing our hands often. Sometimes we will forget that, like if our hands aren't dry, we forget that they're contaminated. Perhaps if we were like cracking eggs and then we moved on and went to the next task, but we didn't wash our hands in between, we can get that raw egg residue onto the next product that we're working with. So hand washing is number one. And I always recommend that we put hand washing stations in easy, convenient locations, signs to remind people. And then just, if you're working with staff, you're just reminding them to wash their hands often. But oftentimes it's best if you just make it as convenient as possible to wash your hands. So hand washing stations in the prepping area that are easily accessed. The next cause of foodborne illness outbreaks would be poor time or temperature control. So we can kill most microorganisms. We can reduce them to acceptable levels or kill them by cooking for a certain period of time or cooking something to a certain temperature. That's one thing we can do. So we can reduce things. So there's always microorganisms that exist in most food products. That's just the existence of food has microorganisms. But when they get to unacceptable levels, they become pathogens that can make us ill. So we always cook things, or we reduce temperatures, we cool things in order to get rid of them or to hold them at acceptable levels. And then we have this thing called the danger zone. So this is when we hold food between 4 degrees C and 60 degrees C. So if we have food in there, that's so basically essentially room temperature. It's the temperature we live at every single day. 4 degrees Celsius to 60 degrees Celsius is the danger zone. So this is the, and you can really say 64 degrees. This is the temperature where microbes love to grow, biological spores grow faster and faster and faster at this time because they just thrive in this temperature. That's the danger zone. And this is typically, so when we leave food out, say at a barbecue, or we have a holding tray, so we put food out for a buffet, we leave it in this realm of 4 degrees to 60 for too long, over 2 hours, the bacterial load can be too high at that point to be safe. So if food is left out on the counter for too long, that's where time and temperature control happens. So we really need to keep things refrigerated, or we need to cook things over 64 degrees C at all times. So holding temperature should be around, food should be held at around 70, 74 degrees C. And if we're serving it, it should not have fallen under 64 degrees Celsius. So knowing your time and temperature for the food you're creating is very important, and knowing how long your ingredients have been sitting out on the counter, or your products that you're going to serve to people have been sitting out, is very important. And keeping the food out of the danger zone is critical. So we always keep our refrigeration under 4 degrees, for example. So we always check that our fridge is holding at that temperature or lower. These are things we can do to prevent food entering the danger zone. And then there's improper cleaning and sanitizing. So we know that in food production, even, you clean something, it looks clean, but if we don't follow the proper procedures of cleaning, we may still have soil left on the product, or on the item that we're cleaning, some of our tools, utensils for the kitchen. If we don't sanitize it, we may not kill or reduce those microbes to an acceptable level. So we have to follow proper cleaning and sanitizing procedures. And there is, for commercial kitchens, procedures for for 2-step or 3-step dishwashing, for example. So where we would do a scrape, where we remove the soil, we do a wash, a rinse, and a sanitize, and then air dry, in order to ensure that we have completely cleaned those products, those utensils and things correctly. So we have to follow the cleaning and sanitizing procedures in place. We also have to follow proper cleaning and sanitizing procedures for our equipment. So if we have, say, a KitchenAid mixer that's on our counter, it should have some sort of tear down method so that we can take it apart and properly clean anywhere that might have some dough that's stuck, or somewhere that we can't see or reach with the cloth. So that's what we do. We make sure that we follow proper cleaning and sanitizing. We take things down apart, do them, take it down according to our manufacturer specifications. So when we talk back about the listeria in the meat plant earlier, I mentioned, oftentimes that can come from not being able to reach and clean one area of a production utensil or equipment, not being able to tear it down and clean it properly. Listeria will grow and breed in that one area. So there's like catch points or harbor points that we need to always know about to make sure they get clean. Because once you get bacteria growing in one area that you can't properly clean, you'll fend that off for a really long time if you have a food product. So preventing physical contamination, this is something that we can easily do by not wearing jewelry or eyelashes or fake nails that could fall into food when we're producing it. We wear gloves. Now that's depending on where you work. Talk to your local health unit about their opinion on gloves. Some people say hands are better. Some people want you to wear gloves. So just check with your health unit officer. Wearing hair nets and beer nets to prevent hair from falling into the food. It's not necessarily a requirement. Again, it's up to interpretation of your public health officer at that time, but it does help to prevent getting hair into the products. Inspect your equipment and parts that may become dislodged into your food. So say you have screws that are loose or something like that. You want to always inspect before you use, make sure that there's nothing that could fall into the food. Store your food in sealed containers to prevent objects from falling into the product. So if you're putting it into refrigeration or your raw materials into a warehouse, putting them in sealed lidded containers really prevents anything from, even dust settling on the product, but also objects from falling in, even pieces of cardboard or small pieces of label that could fall off from your warehouse just over time, So storing your products in sealed containers can prevent objects from falling into parts. Preventing chemical contamination, there's a few things we can do here. Now, so there's something to understand with chemical contamination. So we use chemicals and detergents and sanitizers. We use these things to help us prevent biological contamination. So we wash our products, we do our dishes, we wash our equipment down with detergents, sanitizers, cleaning agents, whatever we need to use. But the kind of ironic thing is that these cleaners can then themselves become a chemical hazard or hazard of them own. So usually what we have to remind our small businesses is that we must use chemicals to the manufacturer's requirements. So if they tell you to use lukewarm water with your cleaner, use lukewarm water because that's when it's most effective. If we don't follow the manufacturer's instructions, we may not actually kill the biological contaminants that we were trying to kill, and then we may also impose a chemical contamination on the equipment as well. So it's important that we don't, by trying to remove one hazard, we create a new one with a chemical contamination. So that's just something to know. So always follow the guidelines that are provided by the supplier of the chemicals. And don't create a new problem. So using the right parts per million of each chemical is important. Using the right handling instructions is very important. Another thing is that we always store chemicals in their own area. They're labeled properly, and we don't store chemicals in food containers, and we keep them separate from the food 100%. We rinse and clean our equipment thoroughly to remove any chemical residue after cleaning. And we want to make sure that, we're, again, not creating a chemical hazard in terms of that. So washing agricultural chemicals from fruit and vegetables. We always wash our fruits and vegetables thoroughly before using them in food products to remove pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers. This is generally when we're processing from a large head or something of cauliflower or a whole apple. If you receive individually quick frozen or bags of processed, so already processed vegetables, we wouldn't expect to see any agricultural chemicals in those cases. But if it's minimally or not processed raw ingredients, then we can always wash to remove pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers. But again, if you get anything in a bag, individually quick frozen or frozen in some sort of processed capacity, you shouldn't have to worry too much because the processor would have already done that. We have to consider things like food additives and preservatives, and they should always be introduced at the right quantity to our recipe. So consider things like nitrates in bacon or sulfates in wine. Those are both chemicals that are added to a product to make the shelf life longer, but added at the wrong quantity can be unsafe for the person consuming it. So if you're adding any sort of food additive or preservative, very, very important that we make sure we're adding this at the right quantity. And this should be #1 priority for you if you have these sort of shelf stabilizers in your food product. Toxic metals can be avoided by using food grade equipment and tools. So if you're buying new equipment to process food, it's important that you're buying from reputable suppliers, that you know that the equipment that you're buying is food grade equipment, that is made from metals that are safe, that aren't going to be harmful, that aren't going to leach into your food product. So usually if you're buying from a reputable supplier in North America, They will give you details of all of that. You know, you can buy with confidence. If you're buying from overseas, there are a lot of fantastic suppliers, but there's also some that may not be. So you must do your due diligence and ensure that what you're buying is safe. And then of course, there's natural toxins that are occurring in seafood or shellfish. So again, we want to buy from reputable suppliers so we can ensure that these levels, if we were provided with like a certificate of analysis that tells us if there's natural toxins occurring in our raw material, that they're legitimate. So let's talk about some safe work habits to promote food safety at your food production facility. So food safety hazards stem from the facility itself, so construction and location, personnel practices. So going back, sorry, to facility construction and location. So this is talking about the difference between maybe a very old facility with maybe the roof is starting to leak, or there's growth around the building, where it's located. Do you have access to clean water? Do you have access to stable hydro where you're getting your electricity on a consistent basis, for example? Are the walls in the facility washable? Is the floor old and damaged, so it has maybe pitting areas where bacteria can get in and you can't easily clean it, so that bacteria will grow? Facility construction location is very important to food safety and something that we try to control when we start our food business. Personnel practices, we've touched on this a couple of times. So uniforms, wearing aprons when you're cooking, and then changing those uniforms or aprons between what you're doing, or if you soil your uniform. If you're cooking or working with raw product all day, and then you're moving on to a ready to eat, you want to change your uniform so you're not contaminating with your clothes that next ready to eat product. We have personal hygiene, so ensuring that people are showering before they come to work, they're not coughing into the food product, they're not sneezing into even their hand, they should be using their elbow and then changing their uniform if they're sneezing. There's lots of different things that we can consider into hygiene, but most important is always washing our hands. Then there's food prep and handling, of course. So handling the food products, washing our hands, and following cross-contamination and allergen sort of rules that we have in place to ensure that we don't cross-contaminate something that's ready to eat with something that's raw that won't be cooked, so that hasn't been cooked yet. Next up is purchasing and receiving ingredients and packaging. So remember that one of the ways, anytime something enters your food facility, is an opportunity for pests to come in or for some contamination to come in that you can't control. You have to try to control hazards at the purchasing and receiving ingredient side as well as packaging. So we want to make sure that products come in that are not soiled. When we get, say, flour, we're checking it for any signs of pest damage. Or any sort of rotting. We want to make sure that if we're getting milk or anything dairy related, that those products have arrived to us at the right temperature. They haven't been stuck in the danger zone. So say we had a dairy product delivered to us, but the truck and trailer was at 10 degrees Celsius, and we don't know how long it was sitting at that temperature, that product should be rejected. We should have a plan so that we don't accept into our facility potentially hazardous dairy or potentially hazardous ingredients. So we have to have, in terms of purchasing and receiving, we kind of have processes in place that we follow, and we buy from reputable suppliers. We have purchase orders. Purchase orders should line up with the bill of lading that the driver brings to us if we get it delivered. And then the physical product. So it's kind of a 3-point check. The physical product, the bill of lading, and the purchase order are all the same. If you're at a smaller sort of operation where you're buying for yourself, and you're just going to Costco or something, that's okay, that's great, but just make sure you're checking expiry dates, there's no sign of damage to your product, and you're keeping your food at the right temperature during transport, things like that. So we can put lots of different things in place in terms of purchase and receiving. If you have questions about any of those procedures, or you want to just reach out to me after, we can definitely discuss that. Storage of ingredients. So once ingredients and packaging arrive into our facility and we know they're free from pests and they're food safe, we want to put them away and store them properly. So we store obviously our refrigerated stuff under 4 degrees Celsius in the refrigerator. We store frozen goods at a freezer temperature of -18°C, and we store ambient in a warehouse. We control for pests. We make sure that we don't overstock our refrigeration, for example. We're not putting too many things in there so that the refrigerator has to work overtime, or it's actually not cooling some of the products because they're too packed into the refrigerator. So it's important to have good airflow in a refrigeration and in a freezer. Food safety hazards also stem from specifications of your food product. So again, if you have a raw meat product, and you could have a food safety hazard just by not cooking it properly. Different pH levels have different attributes that can contribute to a higher or lower microbe count. Active water, so if you have a dry product that's completely has no water in it, so it's completely dried out, you're at a lower risk than someone who has a product that has some moisture in it. So specifications of your food product are important. Sanitation, so how you take out the garbage, how often do you get your waste removed from the dumpster out back, everything like that. Sanitation includes cleaning, your cleaning protocols, all of your washing down of your equipment, how you sanitize it, and following proper procedures. We have waste control, like I mentioned, getting garbage out of the facility. Pest control, most people often, pay a monthly fee to a company like Able Pest Control or Orkin, who will come in and kind of monitor pest traps that they put up and things like that. So you can outsource pests if you're not interested in that. And then of course, equipment. So if you don't do preventative maintenance on your equipment, you can create food safety hazards. So how do we control most hazards? We have food safety training. We apply food safety principles in our kitchen. We have our good manufacturing practices, which I'll show you on the next slide, that correspond with what I was just talking about. And then these basic principles need to already be in place for you to have HASSA. So they are the bedrock of our HASSA plan. So we do need to have good manufacturing and practices in place. So like I said, the good manufacturing practices are the same as where we find the food safety risks stemming from. So we have our facility. So do we have a facility that has, walls that are washable, not drop ceilings? We have plastic coverings over our lights so that the glass doesn't shatter and fall into our food product. There's so many things that facility relates to. Again, if you want to know anything more about good manufacturing practices, I'm happy to discuss them with you. There's personnel practices we talked about, purchasing and receiving ingredients and packaging, storing them, your specifications, sanitation, waste control, pest control, and equipment. So those are good manufacturing practices. You do have to have those in place in order to understand HASSA. So HASSA stands for the Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. So HASSA was actually developed for NASA in order to ensure that the food that arrived in the International Space Station or wherever they were going, I think they were going to the moon at the time, that it was absolutely 100% safe, because they could not risk any sort of foodborne illness when they were in space, obviously. So they developed this HASSA, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, and it is really internationally recognized, which is one of the only thing that the whole world kind of agrees on, which is fantastic. But we wonder, at what level do I need to be HASSA certified? And really, HASSA is like your next level from, okay, you're cooking in a commercial kitchen, or you have your own kitchen certified at your home and you're doing some cooking and you're ready to get into the retail, or maybe Loblaws or someone has approached you. And usually it's not required right away for any of their local programs, but it is usually required down the line. As you start to grow, HASSA is your first step into being third-party audit certified for food safety. So if you wanted to get SQF certified, or if you wanted to become BRC certified or ISO 9001 certified, anything that's third-party audit certified, HASSA is the bedrock. You have to have HASSA in order to move on from there. So I like to introduce you to what HASSA is and its principles so that it doesn't freak you out when it does come to it, because it seems like very daunting, but it doesn't have to be. So let's look at the principles and then I can talk to you about each one of them. So there are 7 principles to HASSA, and they are hazard analysis, critical control point identification, establishing critical limits, monitoring, corrective action, record keeping, and verification. So what does that look like? So hazard analysis. This is where we go through the flow of our process for each product that we make. We can group products together if they're similar, but we take every product that we make and we go through and we put a flow chart down of like order of operation. How do we do this? How, like, we order ingredients, they arrive, we put them away, and then we're making our food product. And this is what the flow looks like. And then we go through, we identify any hazard that hasn't been controlled by our good manufacturing practices. So a lot of times these things would be, for example, if you're making a food product that has egg in it, you would want to cook that egg to 165 degrees or higher in order to ensure it's safe. If you have a meat product, same thing, you have a temperature that you have to get it to depending on what it is, say 145 for pork to a safe level, or 180, 190 for beef, or whatever you're doing. So everything has a limit. And so we have to just identify where are these hazards. So if I'm making a food product and I'm putting in egg, I'm going to identify that there's a hazard at that mixing point. So I have to control that hazard. And so I have to note that that hazard is there. And then I have to identify it as a critical control point. So if my flow is, mix and blend the milk and then adding the other products like spices, and then the next is to add the egg, the critical control point identification would actually be at the cooking stage, the cooking step of that process. And we identify that as something that has to be done. And then we have to say, what is our critical limit? What does it has to reach? And what it has to reach is that 165 degrees, where we know that science has told us that that's where the pathogens are less likely to survive or not likely to be present at all once they're cooked. So that would be our critical limit. We must establish critical limit because we have to be able to monitor. So in order to monitor, we're using things like thermometers, for example. So we have identified our hazard, we know which point it is, it's at the cooking stage. Our critical limit is 165, and we monitor it by using a thermometer in order to make sure that we reach that critical limit. So what happens when we're cooking and we don't reach 165 degrees? So we have to have a corrective action, a plan in place that says, what are we going to do if we don't reach it? And in a cooking step, it's usually a stage of just cooking it for longer. But there are other issues where you might have a hazard analysis that shows that the critical control point is at your X-ray. And your X-ray kicks off a product because it has something in it. Your corrective action might be to stop the production run and take a look at why that food product had something in it. So the corrective action is really just related to the point of that where you're at, and you have to know, kind of like planning ahead of time, what do we do if we can't meet this limit? So if we can't reach the pH that we've set as our critical limit, what are we going to do about it? The key to HASSA and HASSA principles is keeping records of everything we do, showing that we actually checked and monitored by writing it down. So you may check the temperature of your food product, make sure that it reached 165 degrees to kill all the pathogens in the egg, but you want to have something to note that you actually signed off on that. And this is the difference, and this is kind of where the difference happens between like a commercial kitchen and when you start getting into commercialized food production. Record keeping, although you do keep records in a commercial kitchen, you wouldn't often have batch records for every single product that you make there that shows that you reached the internal temperatures of A, B, or C. But when you start getting into larger production, you want to start keeping records that show that you checked on all of these things, or that someone that you work with or your staff had checked on all these things. And then 7th is to verify. So not only do you have yourself or staff checking it, you have someone checking the checker. So someone is verifying all the records from the day. So say you cook for 11 straight hours of a food product, someone should be verifying that along all the points, someone has verified and reviewed um, those steps. So HASCP is not something to necessarily be afraid of. It's actually not, it's not too complicated depending on how many SKUs you have. And obviously with large scale production, it can get much more daunting. But for simple recipes and simple items and 1 or 2 SKUs, a HASCP plan is what it's called. And each of these different principles has forms related to it. So you go through all the different forms and you fill it out for each product that you're making. And then you can have, you know, your HASCP plan. So it does take some time. Usually when you get to that level, you have a team of people working with you who can help you put this all together. So usually it's not just on your own. Normally it's multidisciplinary, and that's why I, as a buyer by trade, was always involved in the HASCP. I was on the HASCP team for all the companies that I worked for, because one of my in purchasing, I was actually controlling one of the good manufacturing practices. So that's why it's a multidisciplinary team. So hopefully that helps to kind of explain HASCP a little bit. Obviously, it's a very brief, quick introduction to it, just to kind of understand what it is that HASCP looks like. But of course, if you want to know more, absolutely, I'm happy to help. I do have my contact information here, and if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. And I think that Angela is monitoring that. There's nothing in there at the moment. So if you need to, I'll just stop my share and we can go back to the chat. All right.
That's wonderful. Honestly, it's so informative. And whenever I sit through these, I'm always like, of course, there's not going to be a ton of chat because you have all the information right there for everybody. So that's great. I don't see anything on Facebook right now, either for comments, but if anybody is watching and has any comments or questions, please send us, you can put it in there, or you can send me an email directly. I'll double check if anybody has any comments or questions in the room before we sign off for today. I'll give everybody a second. So nothing on here, but anybody who is sitting in the room, in our Zoom room, please stick around for a second and then we can have a chat even offline. So thank you, Lisa, for all that information. If you are looking forward getting into food packaging, into food safety, please connect with us. So success@guelphbusiness.com. If you're looking to connect with Lisa, Lisa is at Cove Motion Packaging. I have put her link to their Facebook page in the Facebook live stream, but you can also connect with us and we can get you contacted directly with Lisa if you have any questions for her. We do like to let everybody know there are new, I have comment from Tony. So there are new labeling requirements. Please check the Government of Canada's websites. They keep everything up to date on there. They even have very easy to download, because your nutrition requirement labels have to be specific sizes based on specific size of print. And so I have had people try to auto zoom the size of their label for different sizes of printed boxes and things. That is not allowed. I'm sure Lisa, but I just like, well, double reinforce that you have to use specific size of nutrition labels. All that requirements is right on the government's page. I can add those links into the Facebook page and send those to everybody who's in the room today after the fact, because I have all those links. If you are next week for our Facebook Live, we will be, I'm always behind. I'm supposed to be joined by our executive director. So we'll see how and we will be talking about what you need to know before you think about registering a business. We've got a lot of people who come into our business center going, I've registered. We're like, wait. If you're thinking of registering a business, please come to next week's session. We will talk about that checklist idea of what you need to do before you even get to that registration phase. Please do note, we have a couple of new programs and stuff that we have out right now. We are looking for mentors. If you are an expert in any field and would love to mentor small businesses, we have a call out for volunteer mentors. So please connect with us. We will get you signed up as a volunteer volunteer mentor. If you are a small business that has been in business for anywhere between a year to 2 years or more, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, and looking for assistance and mentorship in development, growth, and movement of your business, we have just launched our new program called Momentum, and it is specifically there. It's a 3 months intensive mentorship program with the mentors that are volunteering. So you'll get to have advisory program sessions plus mentorship to try and deal with those pain points of growth and development. So please check out those 2 new programs that we've just launched. Please check out the application. For if you have any questions, connect with me, success@guelphbusiness.com. And as always, look at all our new stuff regularly up on our website. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you to everybody in the room. Everyone's please stick around for a second. And thank you to everybody watching Facebook and YouTube. And we will see you all next week.